Our aim is to talk Ohio State football on the field, but this is 2020, so stay tuned for your medical latest from the campuses across the Big Ten. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, presenting Ohio State Buckeyes live each and every Wednesday. It's 2 o'clock Eastern time with these three. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. Kevin Noon of Rivals Buckeye Grove. And down at the bottom there, Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports. Bucknuts. Guys, how we doing? Outside of football, how we doing today?
Good.
All right.
Doing good.
All right. Doing all right. Okay. So let me try to set the stage, and then you guys can take it from there because you guys are way ahead of me on this one. But we had known that Michigan had shut down football facilities earlier this week. It has just been announced that the Maryland game has been canceled for Michigan. Okay, how does that affect Ohio State? Well, obviously, we know what the quarantine rules are of 21 days. That doesn't necessarily mean that a team can't play for 21 days, but those specific players are quarantined for 21 days. We don't know how many players or personnel this affects per team. But Ohio State's game versus Michigan State still on, correct?
Yeah,
okay. That's the time we're recording this. Yeah.
So at 2 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday, Ohio State, Michigan State still on from East Lansing at noon on Saturday. But we'll start with you, Steve, in regards to what you think the dominoes that could fall going forward, because, of course, Michigan's very much in jeopardy, whether the Big Ten would make the call that the game cannot be played next week or that the University of Michigan, that's always an option, as Ohio State took that option last week, and Wisconsin has a few times this year to not play the game.
Yeah, it's kind of a state of flux right now, and obviously everybody's making a big deal about the fact Ohio State has to have 6 games to qualify for the Big Ten championship, which would then be a 7th game. And then there's also consideration that if Ohio State doesn't have as many as 7 games, then how can the Buckeyes qualify for the college football playoff? We're already getting some, people who are questioning Ohio State's legitimacy for that, even though we knew in mid-September when they announced that this was going to be the plan, I thought we had everybody on the same page that the exact number of games played didn't matter. We just wanted to measure the relative strength of the teams. But now here we are in early December, and people want to use that against certain schools and certain leagues and whatever. Everybody's got their own bias, Desmond Howard, that they're coming at this. So at any rate, my feeling is Ohio State is doing everything it can, moving heaven and earth, to play this week at Michigan State. Again, they keep all of their testing data in-house, do not share it publicly, but it sounds like they had a good enough number of negative tests, and in some reports, very few, all the way down to 0, potentially, when they got back in Sunday, Monday, that they were able to have some kind of modicum of practice on Tuesday, may practice today, and may practice Thursday. But again, we're kind of on a media lockdown right now because Ryan Day is in quarantine with the virus for 10 days. And Larry Johnson is the acting head coach, has not been made available. Gene Smith hasn't spoken since Saturday when this all came out. So, we're kind of in a holding pattern, I guess, to know exactly to what degree Ohio State is practicing and where things entirely stand. But it looks like a good sign that they're going to play at Michigan State. Now comes the news today that this week's game with Michigan and Maryland is canceled, and Michigan has to pause all activities until at least Monday, which would be the Monday before the Ohio State-Michigan game. And you just wonder, Kirk Herbstreit put them on blast last night on national television, basically saying that it would not surprise him, or he fully expects Michigan to dodge Ohio State in another painful loss. And the college coaches that he talks to are fully recognizing and saying to him, Dabo Swinney, about the Florida State situation in particular, and some others that have come up, that teams are ducking sure losses by, holding up the V card for virus and saying either you've got it and we don't want it, or we've got it and you don't want it, and we're not going to play this game. And he thinks that's what Michigan's going to do next week. But the interesting thing is the Big Ten is now allowing teams, if there are multiple cancellations, teams not affected by the virus can play one another. So whoever Minnesota is supposed to play next week, which I don't have the schedule, the 14th iteration of the schedule is not in front of me, unfortunately. Whoever they're supposed to play, usually they play Wisconsin the last week, but that must not be it. I don't, maybe they already played them. Hell, I don't think they already played them, or they were supposed to play them, or who the hell knows. But at any rate, Ohio State could have another opponent for next week, even if it's a repeat opponent, just to get the 6 games so they can qualify for the Big Ten championship, and also edify the Desmond Howards of the world, who are probably who and Reese Davis's and everybody who, 7 games isn't very many, but it's certainly better than 6. So, get out of here with all that is my feeling. And so there's my 2 cents on where we're at. I'm optimistic that they will play Michigan State. And even if Michigan can't go next week, I would be optimistic that Minnesota is laying out one more week. I mean, they've basically given up on the season. No reason for them to come back and play next week either, that there'd be an opponent, Nebraska or whoever it may be next week for Ohio State to play.
Yeah, Minnesota is scheduled to play Nebraska. That game is at Nebraska. I don't feel like going to Nebraska in December. That's just my personal opinion. And if the ACC does everything they can for Clemson and Notre Dame, why not make Nebraska come to Columbus once again and see how things go? But if Ohio State plays this week, they will be the first Big Ten team to cancel a game and then play the next week, because they really, really want to play. Everybody else who has canceled the game, I don't know that they really, really wanted to play as quickly as Ohio State did. Even Wisconsin, when before the season, wanted an extra week to get ready, and you wonder about their desire to play. And so I think that's one of the big differences of Ohio State and everybody else, is just like they're playing for something, and so they are willing to not just keep things shut down. Where I think everybody at one point or another within the last month has said that Michigan is going to do this, jokingly, half jokingly, in terms of like backing out of the game so that they don't have to deal with it. I still hope, obviously, that it doesn't happen. It's my favorite thing in sports. It's the best rivalry going, even though you could say it's a little one-sided right now. But it would be a sad capper on a very difficult season if we don't at least get that game. That being said, I could totally understand why nobody at Michigan would want any part of it, but also they may never get a more I don't want to say a more weakened Ohio State team than the one they would face this season, because Ohio State had to shut things down, so they're missing people, and this would be Michigan's perhaps best chance to go ahead and beat them. But then again, Michigan may also be missing people as well, and if you're missing the right people or I guess the wrong people, then your chances go way down. But yeah, I'm obviously hoping that the reports, and it was Michigan's rival site, I saw the 11 Warriors is reporting it. They're just repeating what somebody else is reporting, that game is in jeopardy. And would anybody here be surprised if that happens? No.
I'm calling for an apology out of you, Gerd. You cannot be saying any of that stuff about Michigan and malfeasance and trying to game the system or anything like that. We do know that the Michigan-Maryland game is kaput. It's not happening. So it kicks the can down the road. Ohio State not necessarily out of the woods yet. I was sitting in Champaign, Illinois, when the call came to cancel the Illinois game. So, yeah, I know about that. But, things seem to be trending in the right direction for Ohio State at this point. We still don't know necessarily what the roster is going to look like. There's been a lot of whispering and whatnot, but I'm not going to be the guy that's going to throw out, speculative things in terms of that. I mean, this isn't talking about somebody with turf toe or a stinger or something like that. This is something a little bit more serious, regardless of what your belief on COVID is. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Let's say Ohio State does play, Michigan State does get by. Ohio State's sitting with 5 games, then we're at 6. And if Michigan isn't able to go for one reason or another, is it just so much of a matter of, I really believe Minnesota's done for the year. Not only do they have an outbreak, they have a huge outbreak at this point. So Minnesota's opponent becomes open. But could you see a shuffling around and maybe Ohio State is able to play Maryland, a team that it was supposed to play earlier? The Terps shut down their program for a bit when they had their own COVID scare. That game didn't end up happening. That game probably, in the grand scheme of things, might even mean a little bit more in terms of FPI and all these other made-up metrics and all of that stuff. But I'm with probably everybody else who's watching this show. I certainly want to see Ohio State and Michigan happen, but I'm not exactly optimistic that it's going to happen. And I agree with what Tony said, that if Michigan could get to the point of playing the game, this might be their best chance of stealing one, because we just don't know what Ohio State's roster is going to look like. And quite honestly, we'll probably get the status report 10 minutes after the team takes the field in East Lansing for warm-ups, and we could kind of figure it out ourselves. Yeah,
I was told we would, in theory, get the availability report 10 a.m. on Saturday. So like Kevin's saying, this is we either get the report and they're already on the field, or they're already on the field and then they release the report, because you can't hide it forever. And then if there is no report, you're just process of elimination. That person's not here. That person's not here. I'm just going to assume they have COVID. And I guess one way to maybe avoid that is just give us who's out, because that's all the availability report is. It just tells you who's not playing and who is a game day decision. Doesn't tell you what they're out for. Doesn't tell you what their ailment or whatever. You can only hide this for a couple of more days, and then reality sinks in. And for me, that's one of the things that I think maybe fans are forgetting, is that, yes, looks like football is happening. We got it back. And then it's not a be careful what you wish for. It's just well, now here's the reality of the situation. Here's the football team on the field. How do you feel about it now? And depending on who in fact is out there.
For a series that is more historic and legendary than any in sports, in my opinion, and I'm biased, yes, that has the 1973 vote that sent Ohio State to the Rose Bowl, that has Woody going for 2 in a 50-14 game, that has David Boston versus Charles Woodson, that has all these storylines and pinnacle moments and turning points within the series. The guy who has his part of it, meaning Jim Harbaugh, as both a player on the good side and the coach on the bad side, who once guaranteed a win and came through, to the angst of Ohio State fans. If he's a true competitor, and for whatever say-so he has in it, I would rather be the guy as a Michigan head coach to fall to 0-6 and go out there and lose 52-10 and say at least we competed, than be the guy that, even though it was under the guise of health and safety concerns, everyone knew we didn't want to play. We didn't want to get our butts kicked. We didn't want to show up and be embarrassed. I've also got a bit of a issue with the Big Ten scenario. And Kevin, I saw your mouth open, so I'll let you jump in as soon as I get done with this one. This is crazy. So, Steve, I know that you're a baseball fan, and you know how the batting championship has worked, that if you don't have enough plate appearances to qualify for a batting championship, but you are such a tremendous hitter who had a great season, you get at-bats, hitless at-bats added to your total that would equal the requirement needed. So, for example, if Steve's 40 for 100 and there's 100 plate appearances needed, and I'm 50 for 90, then the rule would be, well, I don't qualify for the batting championship. But it's obvious that I would have won the batting championship regardless. So Major League Baseball gives me an 0 for 10. I'm 50 for 100. Boom, I win the batting championship. If Ohio State would be left out of the Big Ten championship game at 5-0, Let's say they get to play Michigan State. They're 5-0. Indiana, let's say, who knows what's going to happen with their games? They might just still stay at 5-1, 7-1, whatever. The winning percentage is Ohio State's. The head-to-head is Ohio State's. And if Ohio State is allowed on that particular Big Ten championship weekend to go play somewhere else, that just seems completely idiotic to me and short-sighted when they set up the rules that they're not sending a 5-0 team to go play in the Big Ten championship game that won the head-to-head, but they're able to go play somewhere else. It just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Kevin, did you have something you wanted to say? Then I can address a thought.
No, go ahead, jump on that. It's already passed.
Okay. Well, my feeling on this is I understand why they put that in there. They want to have a legitimate championship. They didn't want a team that was maybe 4-0 outlasting a team that was 7-1 or, whatever. But I think that the short-sightedness in this is a school without assigning blame, without casting an aspersion on anybody, because I don't think that this is what any of this was about, was, they cost us a game. People didn't want to be making those statements in this delicate time frame that we're all in, how fragile we all are because of this virus and the pandemic, that we didn't want to stigmatize anybody and say, oh, you cost Ohio State a championship. So Maryland, in this instance, is not being stigmatized. But Maryland was the school, quote unquote, at fault, or that was infected, that missed that game that is going to cause Ohio State to fall potentially below the 6-game threshold. And Ohio State should not be penalized for that. That game should be added back on as a counter to say, okay, they did play 6 games in the instance that you're talking about with that batting championship thing. We know on the field they played 5 games. By all rights, they should have played 6. They missed 2 on their own, just rub of the green. They shouldn't be penalized because Maryland canceled on them, is kind of my gist of this, without assigning one bit of blame to Maryland. Ohio State's infected too. There's no blame. It's just that game caused Ohio State in this instance to fall below the number of 6 potentially. And Ohio State shouldn't be penalized because of actions of other people, other schools, in my opinion.
I agree.
A school that was infected 3 and missed 3 games because they themselves was infected, then I see it. But that's not what's happened here.
Right, I agree. There was so much about these games being called no contests or whatnot. All right, that's fine. Let's not have it be a straight up forfeit to the point of where the team that's quote unquote at fault gets a loss. But I think that the team that no fault of their own doesn't get the game should get, I don't know, like a little check mark next to them or something like that. And if we get to the point of where we're really splitting hairs to decide who's going to represent each of the divisions, and if you have a check mark and you're a game short, you should be able, to cash that in and be like, well, look, it wasn't our fault there at that point, and be able to get to Indianapolis at this point. But, I think the reality is too, let's say Ohio State doesn't get to Indianapolis. Let's say that Michigan doesn't happen. The Big Ten, with its tremendous track record of being yielding, welcoming, and making things happen for the good of its members, doesn't do anything to help Ohio State in its schedule. Ohio State honestly could play a much better team. No offense to Northwestern, but could play a better team, in my opinion, in a 2-versus-2 championship week type of game and still not be able to win a Big Ten championship, but could get rewarded more in the eyes of the college football playoff committee, or at least create discussion of which it means more, that Big Ten title against maybe a team that just happened to be hot on the right weeks but isn't special, or playing more of a traditional power, a team that's ranked higher in the college football playoff, potentially not have the league title, but have a win that might be more of a quality win. And I know that question was asked of Gary Barta on the conference call last night after the rankings were put out. And of course, they're not really going to answer anything that's a hypothetical or whatnot, but I mean, it does really create some interesting points.
I think, Mark, this is very similar to, you mentioned the foresight or lack of foresight of this rule. I think it's similar to what the Big 12 used to have with no conference championship. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it didn't with the college football playoffs. And I think this rule, one year it may have helped them, may have helped Ohio State. One year it may have hurt them, and this happens to be the year that maybe it hurts them. And I go back and forth on, do they even need a Big Ten championship? Because when it comes to the college football playoff rankings, the conference championship is a tiebreaker. Who is going to be measured against them? Like, what team is going to be measured against them? Then Kevin, as you said, talking with Gary Barta last night, they spent a lot of time apparently comparing Texas A&M and Ohio State. And what got Ohio State over the hump is their offense. And I don't know how pretty that offense is going to be in any of the games they play this week, depending on who's out. And you wonder if that then evens things out even more with Texas A&M and Ohio State, even though you put them on the same field in January. And I think we all know how that would go. It's it's all just, by chance. This is a bad rule this year, and that's a bad rule next year. I do plan on asking Barta next week if I could ever actually get called on, is at what point, because he said it's troubling, it's difficult to judge teams that play 4 games versus, and he did say 4 games, just played fewer games than teams who play more. And I want to ask him at what point do you guys start to realize that maybe you're penalizing teams and conferences that take the coronavirus more seriously than other teams and conferences? Because I'm sure there are teams and conferences going through exactly what Ohio State, Michigan, and Maryland are going through, but they're playing and or be able to reschedule. And again, then I guess that comes down to the fault of the Big Ten, because they can't reschedule. And for me, that is the greatest lack of foresight. But we all said that way back when. So that was I don't think you needed foresight to know that was going to come.
Tommy Tom wants to know if we know of any other coaches or personnel staff that will be affected in addition to Ryan Day.
We can't violate the privacy just like we can with the players. Ohio State has said nothing about that, just Ryan Day, and so I guess we'll just leave it at that.
Also have a question coming in from King Miko concerning Gene Smith, and this was alluded to by one of you, whether he's in talks with Nebraska for the Michigan week.
I actually got a call from a buddy of mine in Nebraska. We were already on the air, so I wasn't able to take it.
Put him on speaker.
I know what I have to do after the show, but I think that I think you have to keep all of your options open, but I think that you also have to focus on the next game. They have to get through Michigan State. This is all moot point if they don't play this Michigan State game. I know that it's not a case of where Gene paying attention to the team is going to keep people from coming down with COVID or anything like that happen, but you can't get too far ahead of yourself. You get through this game, and then maybe you continue some conversations that you kind of start at the latter point of this week. I'm highly skeptical that Ohio State Michigan happens at this point. I really am. So I think you have to have some things in play, but you can't get too far down the road. You have to stay focused on the task at hand.
Texas A&M, Ohio State. So the Aggies do play Auburn this week. They're decent. They're not great. They got their doors blown off by Alabama by 29, and it could have been much worse. Texas A&M will play 2 sub-500 teams after that in Tennessee and Ole Miss, I believe, is the rundown. Yeah. And Ohio State will be playing a Michigan State team that has not looked impressive, but they did then beat Northwestern last week and could have a game against, let's say, if they can get Wisconsin. I would say that those 2 games trump the 3 games played by Texas A&M. And they're already 4th. They're considered the 4th best team by the selection committee.
My tweet that I put out a while ago, one of our writers did a story about Desmond Howard's comments and that Ohio State's not in the top 4. And I said, I think it's Tony, this is his line that he's used any number of times too. I mean, everybody who has ever tried to assess the playoff and who should be in the Final 4, the Final 2, or when it used to be the BCS, I think we've always gone by the provision that a loss to a top 10 team is certainly much more impressive than a win over a top 10 team. In fact, I don't even know how you can quantify one over the other. I don't know how anyone in their right mind would consider a win over a top 10 team to be more impressive than a loss to a top. I mean, that says it all. When you've lost, I mean, for you to beat a top 10 team, that's a hell of an accomplishment. But when you've lost to a top 10 team, man, does that really tell you how good you really are? I mean,
that puts hair on your chest.
Yes, it does.
I was going to say, the way that A&M lost 52-24 to Alabama in week 2, oh boy, let me tell you, it built a lot of character. It's worth a lot of points. I mean, they already took playoff merchandise to print because of that. Because
their whole problem with this
loss means everything.
Their whole problem with this is that Texas A&M beat Florida. Florida is the team that they really could prop up because Florida's got the quarterback and the high-powered offense and everything else. Texas A&M, I mean, my God, you put that LSU game on last week, you could put that on a loop, and that would be a cure for insomnia. I mean, that would put you out in 6 minutes, punt, 3 plays punt, 3 plays punt. I mean, it was pathetic. So
was it Kellen Mond or was it Nate Stanley out there? I don't know.
Hard to say.
It was Kellen Mond. It was Kellen Mond. I wouldn't want to insult Nate Stanley like that. 11 for 34. That was a legit 11 for 34. I watched just about every play of that game, and it was similar to Texas A&M's scoring output against Vanderbilt, of all teams, when they scored 17 against mighty Vandy. Texas A&M's a good team. They're very talented, but yeah, they're a mess on offense, and they would get into a game where their defense could only hold so long against Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, fill in the blank, and it's going to be, 31-10. Because they do have a good defense, but they're a mess on offense. They can't throw the ball, and we saw another display of it. We've seen many. And as Steve pointed out, the committee's in a bit of a mess because if Florida beats Alabama and Texas A&M does nothing, but let's say they even improve and win decidedly against, I diss them to a certain extent, but some decent teams. And they've got Auburn coming up. So, and if Ohio State can't play or only plays one game, they've boxed themselves into lifting 3 SEC teams into the top 4.
Well, I think if Florida beats Alabama in the SEC championship game, they will then jump Texas A&M. I just wonder what that means for Ohio State if, say, Notre Dame and Clemson split.
2 SEC teams, 2 ACC teams. There are already forces at work who are trying to do that. I mean, why the Big Ten, even and the Pac-12 by lesser extent, even bother coming back if that was always the goal, to put 2 from the SEC and 2 to the ACC in there? That's why I don't watch that morning garbage. I mean, just a bunch of dumb opinions. And all right, I'm starting to get angry now. Maybe I wait for a second.
Yeah,
use the anger. Let it flow through you.
I don't think it's that cut and dried. I think, I don't know. I do believe Clemson is going to beat Notre Dame. Clemson is going to beat Notre Dame the second time around with Trevor Lawrence playing. And, at that point, I don't think Florida beats Alabama. I just don't know of a way that happens. I mean, I get Kyle Trask. It could be a 50-40 type game. But I just don't see that happening. I mean, I could be wrong, but
look at the Ole Miss game. I mean, Ole Miss put up a lot of points against them. It would have to be that type of shootout, and where Lane Kiffin's team came up short because service was broke, and then Ole Miss kind of had to get out of what it was that was working, and then then Alabama got up by a couple of possessions and lights out at that point. I don't know. I don't know if Florida is multiple enough on offense to be able to get past Alabama. I think you really need to be a multiple type of offense team, and I don't see that out of the Gators. But I've been wrong about them every step of the way this year, so I'm no Gator expert.
Well, and there's no telling who would be out for that game, who might be missing. So I think it's something to Ohio State people should be concerned about. But again, if Ohio State is 6-0, I would think that they would make it. But if Alabama is 9-1 or whatever, I don't see them dropping past 4, having lost to the number 5 team when Alabama has been number 1 for most of the year. It's just, I would be very surprised if the committee left an SEC team out, left one of those 2 teams out in that scenario. Maybe then Notre Dame is the odd man out for having only beaten a Clemson that didn't have 4 or 5 starters. If they lose the ACC championship game, I don't know.
Dalton Moore wants to know, basically, if I whittle down this question, Ryan Day's involvement in preparation for the game this week, what that has looked like.
Well, we assume he's involved with Zoom meetings with the coaches and maybe with the team as well. They probably have him patched in so that he can address the team, on the screen in the meeting room and make a few poignant, pertinent comments to get the team kind of rallied, and certainly working with the offensive staff. Michigan State's defense is very good. I watched the Northwestern game, the BTN and 60 on them in that game, and man, that Northwestern was all. Now I know Northwestern's not a great offensive team, but they had won 5 games, and Ramsey is a veteran quarterback, and they really got after him and harassed him and made him play one of his worst games ever, it appeared. And to me, I would think he is heavily involved in figuring out how Ohio State is going to attack their defense. Their defensive line, to me, Michigan State's was very impressive. They were getting off the ball and creating havoc in the backfield against Northwestern that I don't think Northwestern was expecting, that kind of assault or attack from Michigan State. I mean, this is a team that basically laid down and died against Indiana 24-0. And they came out against Northwestern as if they were playing with their lives, were depending upon it, and, won that game. I mean, 23-20, field goal with about 3 minutes to go was the difference, and a bunch of turnovers for Michigan State on defense. So this is a serious situation. I mean, you've got Ohio State that hasn't played in, 2 weeks going into this game. The second half against Indiana for the offense, 1 touchdown was nothing to write home about. They need to play much better, be much more consistent, sustain drives, and put the points on the board on offense. That was not one of their better halves of football, the last half against Indiana. Now, the first half, or rather the second quarter, was amazing what they did against Indiana in that game. But to me, the consistency was lacking a little bit, and everybody wants to harp on the defense. Well, the defense was a byproduct of what wasn't happening on the offense. They weren't sustaining drives and moving the football. So that kind of puts your defense in a little bit of a tough spot sometimes. So any rate, I would definitely think Ryan Day is studying Michigan State's defense and working directly with Kevin Wilson and the rest of the offensive staff to figure out what it is they need to get done going against a pretty good Michigan State defense.
It wouldn't surprise me if they had a certain amount of plays scripted to start with coming from Ryan Day. But one of the weird things is I went through and really kind of tore through the numbers of Michigan State, and they've been a real hot and cold type of team, and warm and cold. They've never really been hot. They're 36th in the nation in rush defense. They're 16 in pass efficiency defense, but they're 78th in scoring defense. They're allowing 31 points per game. When you look at their 2 wins, I mean, they came out and they played some really solid defense in terms of that Northwestern game. I think there's no way of denying that. How do you get up and do that in a second game in a row? That's always a challenge. You don't see you generally don't see a team come in and string back-to-back high-profile upsets like that. You kind of empty the tank for the one, and then it's a kind of a crapshoot to see what you get in the next game. And then when you look at the Michigan game, which was their other win, Michigan kind of just gift-wrapped it, handed the ball to them and said, here you go. And I don't know if I would put so much of that on Michigan State's competence, but more on Michigan's incompetence.
Rocky Lombardi threw for 323 and 3 touchdowns, and he was only about a smidge over 50% in that game against Michigan. He was just bombing away, and one of our favorite subjects came home to roost in that one. It was the Michigan secondary just getting torched in that one by an marginal, decent wide receiver core. We have all missed a thread here that must be there somewhere that is going to lead, according to Dominic, to an Ohio State West Virginia championship game.
And what?
Okay, I don't know. Okay.
How many teams would have to cancel and close down for COVID before it would be Ohio State and West Virginia? 40, 35?
I think Steve would want more WVU. I mean, definitely more than I have, just with a neighbor that likes the Mountaineers.
Yeah, they're big Mountaineer fans, but I don't think even they can justify them being in the discussion this year. They've had a lot of tough losses, though. I'll say that. Of course, tough losses. We understand those are resume builders. Those are character builders. Those are games that really show your mettle. When you play a game and you lose it, man, that really shows what you're capable of.
Only if they're SEC losses.
Yeah.
Or ACC. Just not Big Ten. Maybe not. It's not Big Ten.
Yes.
Let's see what we got here in the chat. Sorry to say if Larry Johnson looks competent on the sidelines Saturday, kiss him goodbye to a head coaching vacancy somewhere.
No.
Nope. Okay.
No. Larry Johnson is in his
but
mid to late 60s. Larry Johnson, I don't think, is interested in taking over a program at that age. And in fact, what Larry Johnson's son told me at an Agonis Club meeting last year, his son, Tony, as well as his other brother, Larry Jr., both played at Penn State when Larry was a coach there. What Tony told me is that Larry Sr. will coach as long as Larry Sr.'s wife allows Larry Sr. to coach. And that could be next week, next year, or 5 years from now. But I don't think he is going to haul off, move the family one more time, and go try and start something as a head coach somewhere. And I wouldn't say at his advanced age. It's rare that you would see somebody do that.
Year in and year out, every program tries to recruit against Ohio State saying, this is Larry's last year. It's odd timing to up and go and take over a program. And generally when you take over a program, it's a program in disarray. And he's had such an accomplished career. I don't know if he'd want to put the punctuation mark on it with taking over I guess this year, like a 2-6 team or something like that and try and turn it around when we know that's not an overnight situation. So, he'd be coaching well into his 70s to even try to rectify a program. So yeah. I don't see that happening at all.
I talked to him at the bowl game last year, and I was talking to him about Cade Stover, who had moved from linebacker to defensive end. He's at tight end now, but he was moving to defensive end, and I was asking how that was going, and he's like, how much I like these big blocks of clay. And while he does like that, what he also likes? The ability to sign the Bosas and the Chase Young and those guys, and you go take the job at New Mexico State or whatever, you ain't getting him.
Nope.
For as much as I don't like to speculate on coaches and what they're thinking, aside from the obvious Matt Campbell of today or a Tom Herman from 5 years ago that has a trajectory that seems to be working his way up and is a hot commodity, those can be speculated upon, with some reasonable thought. But let's put some perspective on, or some speculation is what it is. Urban Meyer, 2 jobs come up. Texas head coach, Ohio State athletic director. Do we have any thoughts in those directions?
I will start out by saying, as long as you put Urban Meyer in Texas in the title of whatever YouTube video you're doing, your numbers will go through the roof, as what we've seen recently. So the algorithms like those two mentions. I'm still not convinced he's going anywhere. I think he's happy doing what he's doing. But my 5% that he would leave is maybe now up to 35%. But I think he's good where he is in terms of just doing TV, which he's awesome at. I mean, there's nobody like him. Nobody does what he does on television, and he gets to be a grandpa and do that stuff, and maybe watch his kid a little bit playing at Cincinnati, or is at least on the team. Until I hear otherwise, I'm going to assume that he's not leaving. But I did enjoy the reports from Austin that Shelley Meyer, his wife, was doing some house searching in Austin. Unverified, but certainly those are always fun reports to read.
Yeah, exactly. Before he took the Ohio State job, he allegedly bought land outside of State College, Pennsylvania, and multiple other places. So we're not quite to the point of where we're tracking plain tail numbers, which is always a part of a coaching search, but people down there sure seem to believe it. I'm skeptical, but I'm leaving an escape hatch, kind of the way that Tony is, that you just can't predict things that are unpredictable. I've talked to some people around the situation. Obviously, Texas is interested. I think that if the family had their way, Urban would not coach again, but I don't know if Urban's made up his mind.
I just think the health situation still is the stumbling block. I'm not 100% convinced he can ever have a job like that ever again. If that can't be corrected or alleviated one way or the other, medication, surgery, whatever. And so I am very skeptical that it's going to happen. And not only that, I mean, Texas, I mean, they can pay him $10 million, I suppose, and offer all of his blue chip staff members and support staff people as much money as, double what Ohio State's paying them or whatever, maybe, so be it, whatever. I just am skeptical. I don't know. I just think it just seems like an awful big rebuild at Texas to try and accomplish something that, just doesn't seem possible to me. I don't know. It'd be a lot of work. I don't know. It just seems I mean, I know Texas is great recruiting territory, and, Texas had, a national championship team in the mid 2000s with Vince Young, and they've lived off that glory. They got to the championship game with McCoy, and then he got hurt, obviously, in 09 or 10 or whatever year that was. But, it just, there's this romanticism about how great the University of Texas football has been. In my lifetime, I've really not seen it. It's really not that big a deal. When I was a kid, they were just they were great in the early 70s, but I would say late 70s to late 80s, I don't recall much discussion about them at all. Ricky Williams kind of turned on some stuff there in the late 90s, but they were always a day late and a dollar short, just as they've been the last decade. I mean, to me, it's all hat and no cattle, to use one of their phrases. So to me, I just don't think, I mean, that they have the support, they have the money, but something is completely disconnected there. Kind of like at USC, was great 10, 12, 15 years ago. Not any good the last decade, really. Not any good at all, to be honest with you. So,
or the 2 decades before that.
Yeah, and really, struggled prior to that. So, I mean, you think about the Hackett years at USC and the coaches they went through, trying to find a magic formula for what John Robinson had done, and the guys McKay and back prior to that. So I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. I just don't see that he's not going in there on third base. He's running down the first baseline again, and that's no fun to me. That I don't know. To me, I mean,
Partners,
especially when your health's in question, I don't see it.
does he have the dance partners in terms of the conference? I mean, we look at a pretty bad Big Ten this year, but the Big Ten, when Urban was here, was not as bad. And I think that the Big 12 is kind of a jabroni league. It really is. I mean, it's Texas when they decide to show up. It's Oklahoma, and then maybe, I mean, we had a couple years where Baylor and TCU were kind of there. Oklahoma State and Mullet Man, they like to kind of, poke their well-coiffed head up every so often. Iowa State's having some success here and there, but it's, it takes more than just putting a team out there. I think you need to have the pieces around you, and we all love to tell the story of how Urban Meyer, there's no gentleman's agreement or whatnot in terms of recruiting, and this league isn't going to be worth anything unless some people step it up and whatnot, and whatever other tales you like to tell from when Urban joined the Big Ten. I don't know if the Big 12 is going to be capable in its current iteration to create a monster. I just don't think it. I mean, if you're the tallest guy in a room full of little GI Joes, it doesn't really matter. No, it doesn't matter at that point. So I don't know. I think it's just too big of a task. But coaches want to coach, and Urban's still a young guy. So you just don't know. I just don't know where his mindset is.
Aren't money and talent the two most important commodities, and don't they have both of those?
They also have a lot of intrusions in terms of the administration and whatnot, and Urban would not deal well with all of that stuff. There's just a lot of, I think there's more of a donor culture there that just would annoy the living hell out of him. Yes.
The donors want us to play with a wingback?
Yeah, money and talent are very important, but you know what? I also think some autonomy is as well, and I don't think he would get that autonomy there.
I think there's entitlement with the boosters. There's entitlement with the players in terms of it. It's a soft culture, and there's just too many cooks in that kitchen. And Urban Meyer talks all the time about, the third uncle that gets involved with recruiting. Texas may as well be called the Texas third uncles. I mean, they've got, and it's not in terms of recruiting, but all of the rich dudes that are boosters who aren't used to being told no when they give their input would have to be okay with this. And they might be initially, until then they are told no, and then they're going to get mad.
Well, I think part of their problem is Texas high school prospects are now going all over the country. Ohio State's got the top two guys for 2022, the quarterback and the wide receiver, coming to Ohio State. By having an SEC school in the state with Texas A&M, you've now created an entree where Florida schools, Georgia, etc., LSU, which is right next door, can come over and say, okay, you're living in an SEC state. You watch all of our games on SEC Network, or, all you have, okay, if you don't go, to Texas or Texas A&M, that everybody back here in your hometown can watch you play because you're in SEC country too. So that's created a problem. Oklahoma gets their share. At Texas, that was one of the things I didn't mention in my diatribe a minute ago, is Texas has never closed off that border. I mean, Mac Brown, when he had it rolling, he was getting 10 of the top 12 guys in Texas every year. In the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, Texas was recruiting a top 5 class every year into Mac Brown, great recruiter, and they were selecting the guys from Texas that they want as opposed to recruiting them. That's no longer the case. Everybody across the country is going into Texas and taking whoever they want, whoever they can get and whoever they want. And Texas is now lucky to get 3 of those top 12 guys. And if you don't have that basis of talent at the University of Texas and get even 8 of the top 12 guys every year, 7 of the top 12 guys, it's hard to maintain that dominance at the top of the Big 12 food chain. And they just aren't. They have not recruited to that level and kept the top Texas guys at home. And, J.K. Dobbins, I mean, up and down the line, you just look at it. Ohio State's done a number on them, but everybody else has too. I mean, it's not a one school thing. They used to have all the benefits, and today they don't have any of them.
Real quickly, the way that they used to recruit, the way they used to recruit under Mac Brown was that they would have their junior day early in the cycle, and they would bring in the top 3 corners from the state, and they bring in the first corner, like, you're offered. Are you going to accept? Yes or no? And if he said yes, then they would send, if they only needed 1 corner, they'd send 2 and 3 home. If he said no, they'd say, get out of here. They'd offer number 2, and they would go through that cycle. But even when they were getting 10 of the top 12, they still were not, maybe whether or not it was our recruiting services that had the rankings or their own rankings, they were still letting the wrong guys get away from them. They still weren't able to really get across the finish line because maybe they weren't evaluating well. Well, they're not even really getting a chance to evaluate now because they're just, Ohio State has more 5-stars out of Texas through the last several cycles than Texas has. So, you do the math.
I hear all that, and you guys are more involved in it than I am, and I've heard the same from other sources, so I'm not going to deny that they're missing out on their best players, but the recruiting rankings would belie where they're finishing in the standings. They have brought in the 8th, the 3rd, and the 3rd best recruiting classes in the country the last 3 years in 2020, 19, and 18. And I would think Urban Meyer would correct whatever the issues are anyway. His instant credibility to the program would correct much of that, I would think.
I think that's an interesting thing that you brought up those rankings, and that is important. I would say that they've probably done pretty well outside the state of Texas to have those kind of rankings. And one thing that people don't take into consideration is, and this has hurt Ohio State, is when you have not made Ohio your main focus in recruiting, which it is, but it isn't. I mean, Tressel in a 25-man class used to take 12 or 13 Ohio guys, whereas Meyer got down to where he was only taking 5 or 6. And we've even seen probably fewer than that in 1 or 2 years here recently. When you don't take Ohio guys as the basis of Ohio State recruiting, there's no loyalty there. So at the first sign of adversity, a Trayvon Grimes or, whoever it may be, cuts and runs. And that could be the case at Texas too. If they're not building it behind kids from Houston, Dallas, et cetera, and they're having to go to San Jose and San Diego and Camden, New Jersey to get players, the first sign of adversity, those guys are going to cut and run. So, because they don't have an allegiance, they didn't grow up singing the Eyes of Texas and whatever. But I think that is an interesting phenomenon. We've seen it hurt Ohio State, and it may be a factor. And again, I don't have their recruit list in front of me, but you do make a good point. The other thing I would say is, for success in 2020, it's got to be deeper than just the last 3 classes, because the 2 most recent classes are going to have a minimal impact on this year's season anyway. It's got to be the sophomores, the juniors, and the seniors who the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year guys who do most of the heavy lifting usually, and maybe in the 4th and 5th year out they had good classes too. But maybe that bodes well if Herman's not coming back. That if that guy can keep the nucleus, whoever it is, that they'll be a pretty good team the next couple of years.
I will let everyone know that we're here talking Ohio State football with these 3 each and every week. We got Steve Hellwagon on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Girdman, Buckeye Scoop, and Kevin Noon, of course, from Rivals Buckeye Grove. This show each week will continue based on individual contributions, and hopefully a sponsorship is out there. So we will continue to strive to get that, but you can certainly take care of the second part with the individual contributions that we receive on various live streams. We've got 3 professionals here that donate their time each and every week. So keep that in mind, that if you want to see Ohio State football coverage here live every week, that's what we need is, again, contributions from you, and also looking for a sponsorship. So if you have any ideas there, or own a business, or know of anyone who does, then please let us know. Roberto, I don't know that I can make a whole lot out of this question. The question about how they practice the defense before Friday cancel, and the second half approaches to not almost blow a 35-7 lead.
Yeah, he's probably just wanting to know if it's something that they've worked on. Was it something that they were working on before the game was canceled on Friday? That were they going to have improvement based on the second half of Indiana, which was a disaster by anybody's way of thinking? So my feeling is, yeah, they probably spent that time and worked on it, and have talked about it in the interim since then. And I'm sure they're continuing to work on it when they get back on the field this week. So yeah, Roberto, I wouldn't worry about that. That it's at least been dealt with and worked on. Whether it's going to be any better or not, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not sure Rocky Lombardi and his receivers are the guys that are going to threaten that. But, he's capable, somewhat capable. He's a little erratic as a passer from what I can see. Barely a 500 quarterback, maybe a little over percentage-wise. But he I don't know if it's his footwork is bad, but just seems like there's a lot of third downs where he's trying to throw the ball downfield and it's 8 feet over the receiver's head, and it guy's running wide open and just misses him. So now, having said that, he did make a couple great throws against Northwestern this past week. Put the ball exactly where his guy needed it to be on those 2 touchdowns, the deep one and the one kind of over the top in the red zone. So he's capable. Could make him pay a little bit, but he's not anywhere near the caliber of player that Penix was.
Sounds like they need to recruit taller receivers.
No, better quarterback.
Okay.
Better.
According to 247 Sports, according to David Greenshield, Texas has the 5th most talented team according to recruiting.
Well, we all know what you can do with recruiting rankings, right, Steve and Kevin?
And according to Row the Boat, Urban certainly sabotaged us year after year. I think anyone in the country would love to be sabotaged to the tune of 86-9.
Yeah.
Yep.
Some statements don't even justify, because, boy, oh boy, it's so easy. I see all the national championships you've won. That's kind of my take on that, is that, winning, Ohio State went 34 years and didn't win a national championship. So, because they didn't win 3 of the last 5, we're going to castigate this guy. Give me a freaking break. It's kind of my feeling on that.
And I get it. You could start with one game. You could choose one of many games, or you could add on 2 or 3 games, whatever your number is, from just having this just mind-blowing run from 2012 through 18. If you add the Michigan State game from 15 or 13, or, you tack on a couple of those, it could go from being elite right there with Nick Saban. If you look at the actual records, if you look at the winning percentage, I know Saban got the opportunity to win national championships, and to his credit, but I like to point out to people, he was given the opportunity. 2017, he was given the opportunity to play for a national championship. Didn't win his division, got the opportunity to play for a national championship, and he certainly cashed in, but he was given more opportunities than Urban Meyer. But if you just look at their record, they're almost exactly the same. But yeah, you could tack on a couple wins here and there, Kevin, and then that Urban Meyer run from 12 to 18 just becomes like something that's just can't be touched.
Yeah, we can sit there and we can. I think the thing is that Urban lost so few games that it's easy to sit there and remember all 9 of them or whatever and be like, well, in the sideways rain game at home against Michigan State, if they would have done this, and in the Big Ten championship game against Michigan State, they would have done this, and this, that would have never been in a situation of where Jeff Hireman misses a block. And, I think you could sit there and explain away at least 4, maybe 5 of the 9 losses at that point. So, you're a victim of your own success at that point, because if you're dropping 2 a year, that's a lot of games to remember at that point. But when you only lose whatever it is, 9 over that run, they all are fresh wounds to the most diehard fans, and everybody will have an opinion about them.
Urban Meyer didn't bench Cardale Jones. Cardale Jones benched Cardale Jones. Let's just that I'm seeing this comment there. That 2015 offense was not good. The passing game was not good. And a lot of that was Cardale Jones, and they were winning games. They should have been blowing people out, and they were winning by 10 or 14, or that was an unremarkable year. And there was never a chance to start Joe Burrow. So I have to go. It's time to go. Let's do some score predictions and let's get out of here.
Yeah, I digress. Joe Burrow was not Joe Burrow at Ohio State. You can't look at Joe Burrow after 2 years at LSU with those freak receivers that he had there and say that is who Joe Burrow was after a sophomore. Give me a freaking break.
Sure, it's like saying Tom Brady should have won a Heisman at Michigan because he was that great with the Patriots. All right, Tony, your prediction.
Oh, gosh. How about 35-20?
Steve?
Interesting. The line is it was like 22, and I think it's now up to 24, I think. I don't know why. Let me double check that.
Kevin?
I'll jump in. I think that Ohio State's going to be a little rusty just in terms of these guys are creatures of routines, and routines certainly have been broken. We don't know who's not going to be available. Michigan State's going to have to score into the 30s to win this game. They've not scored into the 30s once. I'd like Ohio State to win a sloppy one, 35-10.
Yeah, it opened 22.5. It's now 23.5. I do not think on the road they're going to cover 23.5. I mean, you're talking about a Michigan State team that I know Michigan is not any good, but, their 2 wins are over ranked opponents. They were ranked the day of the game, at least. Northwestern was number 8 team in the country last week. And I know you can take that and tear it in half and throw both halves away for whatever it's worth. They also played pathetically awful, 49-7 or 42-7, something like that at Iowa, 24-0 at home to Indiana. I mean, they were night and day different from what they showed against Indiana to what they showed against Northwestern. Were 2 entirely different football teams. I mean, they were wearing the same uniforms, but with that terrible highlighter green on the front. But at any rate, I'm going to say something like 42-21, something like that. Maybe, something in that range, because I think Michigan State could maybe get a couple touchdowns against this Ohio State defense and, just maybe eke out 20 points, 21 points, something like that. But to me, and the weather is not supposed to be all that bad. No precipitation, perhaps, just kind of cold, around 40. So I don't view that as a big deterrent for Justin Fields. And again, we don't know who's missing for Ohio State. We assume Justin Fields is playing just because he was on their social media after the first outbreak last Wednesday. He was on the social media on Thursday or Friday that he was still practicing, but was he part of the surge on Friday? I have to think if he was part of a surge and was not practicing and not available, news of that would have leaked out. The idea that we haven't, the only name that I've ever really heard, and I'll just throw it out there, is Justin Hilliard. That's the only name of anybody that I've heard, and he's a backup linebacker basically, that I heard that, and there are others certainly, but that's the only name, quote unquote, for certain that I heard had an issue with this latest outbreak. So if it's that caliber player who Ohio State's missing, and not to say anything bad about him, I think they'll be okay. So, guess what? Let's wait and see who shows up on Saturday, if there's a game.
Bring your binoculars. I mean, those of us that'll be up there in the press box. We're going to be. We may have to do pool reporting on who we don't see out there, because it's going to be fast and furious, I think.
It will be.
151 on the line. If you missed part of the show, you just wait for the video to post here in the next 15 to 20 minutes and catch what you missed. For Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts, 247 Sports, Kevin Noon, Buckeye Grove on Rivals, and Tony Gerdeman, of course, from Buckeye Scoop. We'll see you all next week. You guys enjoy the game, and we'll be back next week with Ohio State football.